I have always been hesitant to tell this story. I guess it's a cultural thing. Black people don't talk about UFOs and stuff like that with strangers. Just keep it to yourself and don't embarrass the family. Which is true. If the other kids got a hold of that type of stuff, you will never live it down. This happened when I was about 10 or 11 years old. I'm now 55. So some of the minor details like the year are a little fuzzy, but the facts are still locked in my brain. This happened sometime between 1979 to 1981. It was the summertime, and I was goofing around with two of my good friends from my neighborhood, Robert and Stanley. It wasn't quite dark yet, but it was getting there. Robert and Stanley were doing their impressions of the Saturday Night Live skit with Dan Aykroyd and Steve Martin, two wild and crazy guys, in our apartment cul-de-sac. At that time, Saturday Night Live wasn't my thing, but it was funny seeing my two friends play out the skit. In the background, I could hear helicopters flying around. This wasn't a big deal. You would hear them all the time. Suddenly, Robert and Stanley stopped what they were doing, and Stanley yelled, "Look at that!" when my eyes followed where he was pointing. There in the sky was the biggest craft my young eyes have ever seen. The word big doesn't do it justice. This thing was ginormous. It was slowly creeping across the dusk sky, and I do me creeping. If you ever seen the old television show called V, that's what this thing looked like. Different color lights rotated underneath the craft, and it would take the lights some time to rotate back to our end. That in itself tells you this thing was city size. I could not believe my eyes. I was always fascinated by UFOs and other strange happenings. I could watch that kind of stuff on television all day every day if I could. My first thought was to get my parents outside to see this thing, so I ran into the house to get them. I knew my dad would be out there in a heartbeat to see this thing. When I burst through the door, I was ranting and raving like a crazy person. My mother was on the phone with my aunt and told me to calm down. And she told me I only had a little while longer to be outside before I had to come in. I told my mom, "You have to see this flying saucer in the sky." My mom actually laughed at me, and then she told my aunt and she laughed too. I could hear my aunt on the phone saying that boys still have a wild imagination. I started yelling for my dad, and my mom told me he was out with his brothers getting drunk. You have to love black mothers. They will tell you the stone-cold truth even when you don't want to hear it. However, my dad do love to drink with my uncles. She wasn't lying. So I did the only thing left to do. I ran back outside and saw Robert and Stanley still standing in the same place I left them. Truth be told, Robert and Stanley looked scared to death. I, on the other hand, was hyped beyond hype. I ran down the sidewalk to get a closer look, which I didn't need to do, but I wanted to get closer. While I was in the house, the ship had moved a little further, but not too far. I had to get a closer look at this thing. There were 18 helicopters, I actually counted. They looked like Hot Wheels cars next to a real car. In the background, I could hear Robert and Stanley screaming for me to come back. They sounded really worried. I was slightly angry with them. This was a once-in-a-lifetime event. I wanted to stay and keep watching this thing. However, I ran back to where my friends were standing. We stood out there until this gigantic UFO cruised out of sight. I was broken out of my shock state by Robert's grandmother calling for him to come in, and Stanley said I'm going in too, and I followed suit. As a kid, you think that was cool. However, there was more to come for me. The next day, that's all my friends and I talked about, wondering where did it come from and who was piloting it. After that day, nothing. We never mentioned the incident again. About a week or so after witnessing the UFO, I was outside hanging out with Stanley doing kid stuff. I can't recall where Robert was. Maybe with his parents, but most of the time he stayed with his grandmother. Anyway, it was about noon, and in Georgia during the summertime it can get extremely hot and humid. Stanley and I both agreed to go to our individual homes and meet back up once it cooled off. My mother and father were at work and I was home alone. I've always been a skittish kid and never wanted to be alone by myself too long. That's another story for another time why I was like that. I felt a little sleepy. There was no way I was going to the back of the house where my room was to take a nap. I decided to go into the guest room, which was in the front of the house, and that's what I did. The air conditioner was working great. I started wondering what Mom left me for lunch as I relaxed on the guest bed. "Let me go see," I said to myself. However, I could not move. What the heck? That's when I saw two tall, thin people in dark hooded robes walk right through the wall. Well, one of them walked through the wall, and the other one came through the open door like a human would do. The only thing I could move were my eyes. One of them stood on my left, and the other on my right. This room had a full-length mirror on the wall, and I could see everything. These beings looked like ghosts. I could see right through them. They were doing something to my head. The sleeves of their robes hung in my face. I could tell they were really skinny the way the robes fitted them. I was beyond scared. But what happened next freaked me the hell out. Somehow, these beings made my soul exit my body. I saw my soul stand up and walk towards the wall. The expression on his face, or should I say, my face, was blank with no emotions. This was effing crazy. Who are these people? How can they do such things? I wanted to disappear. Then I blacked out. I woke up terrified. Was I dreaming the whole thing? No, I wasn't. This had something to do with that damn UFO my friends and I saw. I was the only knucklehead that ran after it. I placed myself on their radar that day, and they came back to put a tracker on me. I found this out years later. That's a story for another day. Because this story gets deep.